Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminology, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to talk about the difference between popular fiction and literature. So this is one of those subjects that's always intrigued me because I think whilst there is definitely a difference between literature and popular fiction, it's very difficult to pin down exactly what the difference is. And I think you could argue there's a third tier, which is the kind of books I quite often talk about on this channel, which is kind of trash fiction, the really low end of popular fiction. So I guess the first question is, what is the difference? And I think this is, this is a bit like pornography, or that old quotation about pornography, that you can't say what pornography is, but you know it when you see it. And I think that's true of literature. So, you could easily name a number of books that were literature and a number of books that were popular fiction. And if somebody put a random book in front of you, you could probably categorize it into those two broad, broad buckets. But it's quite difficult to say exactly what determines what is literature and what isn't. So I did a bit of Googling in preparation for this. I actually prepared for this video. You may not believe that, but I did. And I found statements like, popular fiction or genre fiction is often formulaic. So it often has a repeating tropes and concepts and things like that, which are comforting to the reader. Popular fiction or genre fiction is often more focused on plot than on character, whereas literature tends to be more focused on character than plot, which I think is probably broadly true. And I would say I've used the terms there, popular fiction and genre fiction. I don't think all popular fiction is genre fiction, but I think in our minds, at least, in our culture, all genre fiction is popular fiction, rather than literature. And I'll get onto that point a bit later on. But I also think that there's so those statements I've read out are, things that are generally true. And I also found statements like this. So this is a quotation from an article on Medium. So praise for literary novels focuses on the quality of the prose and what the work illuminates about the human condition or society. They're interested in exploring complicated thematic questions like, does everyone deserve forgiveness? So that would be, a trait of literature, is that kind of depth of thinking and quality of the prose. And I think that's a statement that seems reasonable on the surface. But when I think as soon as you start digging into it, it kind of falls apart a bit as a definition, because I think there are plenty of popular novels that are very well written, and that are deep, that are about the human condition. I'm thinking of, Dennis Lehane. I think some of his books are, fantastically rich and deep in their discussion of what it is to be a human. So I think it's consistently, it's difficult to define exactly what the difference is. You might know literature when you see it, you might know popular fiction when you see it, but actually pinning down what the difference is between the two things is complicated, and it's not something I'm going to try and do here, I would say. So this is my general ramblings about popular fiction and literature, and I absolutely invite comments from people who've got their own thoughts about it, and responding to my thoughts. I think it's something that deserves a lot of discussion, because I think it's ill-defined. I think it's almost open to abuse, and I think that there are reasons why books are deemed to be literature rather than popular fiction, which can be problematic. But again, I'll come on to that a bit later. So what constitutes literature then is a nebulous thing, and it can change. And I think this is really important. So Charles Dickens wrote what was considered to be, in his day, popular fiction, and now we consider it literature. Yeah. So I think one of the things about literature is Books can be considered to be literature when they are published, or they can earn their place as literature over time through their impact on readers, through critical discussion of them and things like that, through through their acceptance into the world of academia. And I think what defines what is literature is complicated, because lots of different people have a voice in it, and those voices often agree, but they may differ. So I think academia is one voice that defines literature. I think marketing is also really important, and I think that for me is troubling, because what we're saying when we talk about literature versus popular fiction, there is implicit in that statement the concept that literature has more worth than popular fiction. And I think that because publishing houses, when they publish books, they define them as literature, or they give them a genre. And as soon as you give a book a genre, it becomes popular fiction. So I think we are almost limiting the range of books that we include in discussions about genre by labelling them as literature. But we are also falsely elevating books to the status of literature because it fits with the marketing strategy of a publishing house. And obviously, readers don't have to accept that a book is literature just because the publisher tells them that it is. But I think it's a consideration. I think it's something in there. There's something about the economics of publishing that means that publishers will publish a certain amount of books that they consider to be literature, and that they try and push for literary prizes like the Booker Prize, rather than popular fiction prizes like like the Crime Writers of America awards, that kind of thing. And then I think the other thing that defines literature versus popular fiction is the general mood in society. So depending on where society is generally, a book might be considered to be literature that wouldn't have been in a previous age, and that might not be anything to do with the quality of the book so much as how society accepts the contents of the book. And I think one of the important things about these discussions in relation to books is that we have this concept, I think, in fiction, where as soon as a book is considered to be literature, it almost falls out of the genre that it's in. So a book like Clara and the Sun, by Kazuo Ishiguro, it's a science fiction novel. It's a novel about an artificial human, but it's not classed as science fiction. It's classed as literature, which seems like a nonsense to me. And what that means is, if a book is marketed as genre fiction, they tend not to be accepted as literature. So there are loads of crime novels. I think crime at its heart is absolutely about the human condition and about human relationships, and about the nature of good and evil, and all those things which are very literary topics. But as soon as you badge a book as a crime novel, it doesn't get considered to be literature. And so a book like The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, I thought was a great crime novel, but it's not called a crime novel because it's by Colson Whitehead, and he's considered to be a literary author. And I think that's I think that in order for a genre novel to be considered as literature, it needs to either be really old, so something like like the works of H.G. Wells or Frankenstein. A book like Frankenstein is definitely considered to be literature. But if you were to publish a book with the same plot today, it would probably be marketed as horror or science fiction or whatever. But equally, if you've got a writer whose work is accepted to be literature, like Kazuo Ishiguro, and they write a novel which is a genre novel, then that novel doesn't have a genre, it's literature. Which again seems a nonsense to me, and seems to me to be problematic, because it as I say, it limits the scope of the genre. So science fiction as a genre has a limit, and books that are good enough to be considered literature by academia and the critics and so on aren't science fiction, and so the best you can get in science fiction is lower than it would be otherwise, if that makes sense. So yeah, this rule about what is literature seems weird, and it feels wrong to me. And whenever something feels wrong to me, I think about, is there a similar thing going on elsewhere in the world that that is equivalent but treats things in a different way? And when you think about books, if you think about cinema, I think cinema definitely has a concept that some films have more intrinsic worth, more artistic merit, more depth, whatever, than other films. But I don't think that those films fall out of their genre. Yeah. So 2001, which is considered to be, a classic of cinema, or Solaris, the Andrei Tarkovsky version, which is a classic of world cinema, are still considered to be science fiction films. Yeah, they don't fall out of their genre. There isn't a separate, there isn't an equivalent in cinema of literature. There are films that are great films, and there are films that are, critically lauded and are studied and things like that. But they remain within their genre. They don't get split out of them. And that difference between film and books is really important to me, because my channel is all about popular fiction and it's all about genre fiction. And it seems unfair to me that we're imposing this weird restriction on the genres, that we are elevating, as I say, some books to the status of literature and therefore not considering them to be part of their genre. It just feels completely wrong. And I would hazard a guess that it has happened because books are studied and have been studied for so long that there's a whole industry around academia, around literary criticism, about university courses studying books, and we do kids do exams at school where they read books that are considered to be literature, but they don't, whilst there is clearly film criticism and there is film studies courses and so on and so forth, they're not there to the extent, they're not as embedded in society as literary criticism is. And I think that's the reason why that this difference exists. But I don't think it's helpful. And I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. It feels like it's probably far too late to do anything about it. But do we want to continue to think about books in this way, or should we be just thinking about books? Should we just be saying that, if a book has these themes, it's a crime book, and if it's a really, really, really good crime book, then brilliant. And if it's a not such a good crime book, then hey, that's okay as well. But this distinction between popular fiction and literature seems to be an artificial one, which serves the purposes of people other than readers. So I think it serves the purposes of the publishing industry, because it allows them to pigeonhole books which they need to in order to get them on the shelves and get them in Amazon and sell them, and allow people to discover them and things like that. But it also suits the purposes of academia and literary critics and the newspapers and all those people who make a living out of talking about literature rather than talking about books. So I think for us as readers and lovers of books, I'm not convinced that it isn't a harmful thing. I certainly don't think it's a helpful thing. So yeah, as always with these Sunday rambles, I don't have a fully formed argument for this. I have a series of thoughts which hopefully I've conveyed in a reasonably understandable manner. But do let me know what you think. I don't know what we do about this. As I say, I don't know if there is anything we can do about it, but I think it is something we should be challenging. We should be challenging people when they tell us that something is literature and something else isn't literature. And we should always say, why does it matter? Books are, if a book is good, if a book has meaning, if a book speaks to its readers, then to me, that's what matters. So anyway, ramble over. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, hope everyone's safe and well. I hope you've had a good weekend, and I'll speak to you again soon. Cheerio.